Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Touchstone webinar presented by GIFT.ed in partnership, of course, with the Club of Rome. My name is Rohan Hazel. I'm the Managing Director of GIFT.ed, and it's a pleasure to have you all with us today. So we know that we have participants joining from all around the world. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you might be. I myself am dialing in from Malaysia, so it's just gone 9 p.m. for us. So for those of you who are dialing in from the same time zone, thank you for spending part of your night with us. For anyone new to GIFT.ed, we are a global knowledge platform born out of the Global Institute for Tomorrow, or GIFT. And GIFT is a think tank focused on equipping professionals and youth with the insights and tools needed to navigate and redesign an increasingly complex world. So this webinar is part of our collaboration with the Club of Rome. And I think many of you will know that this is a network of some of the world's most influential thinkers, best known for its pioneering work on the limits to growth and long-term perspectives on civilization. So today's session is upgrading our economic OS, regenerative organizations in the age of AI. And this topic sits at the intersection of two of the most consequential forces shaping our time, which is, of course, the breakdown of our current economic model and the accelerating influence of artificial intelligence. So as AI becomes more deeply embedded in organizational life, from decision-making to interpersonal relationships, the question is no longer what AI can do, but what kind of economic system we're plugging it into. If the underlying system is extractive or short-term or even destabilizing in nature, then AI actually risks accelerating those very failures. And that's why today's conversation is so timely. So our guest is John Fullerton, and he's just released a major new book on this subject, which is Regenerative Economics, Revolutionary Thinking for a World in Crisis. And in it, he presents a bold and science-based vision of an economy that behaves like a living system, which means it's adaptive, evolutionary, and grounded in the patterns that really define life. So his work identifies the unseen design flaws in our current economic model, explains the roots of the many crises that we're facing, from climate breakdown to inequality, and of course lays out regenerative design principles that offer a different trajectory. But I'll let John do more of the explaining about that. John is the founder of the Capital Institute and a former managing director at JP Morgan. So his thinking has shaped global conversations on economics, finance, and the future of capitalism, and has influenced policymakers, business leaders, and communities worldwide. As John is talking across the session, we'll be sharing some links to his work in the chat. Please do feel free to check those out. And of course, in the post-webinar email that we'll be sending all of you, you can find his works and body of work there generally. And of course, today leading the conversation is Chandran Nair, who's the founder of the Global Institute for Tomorrow, and as well as the chairman of GIFT.ed. He's a global thought leader known for rethinking economic orthodoxy through the lens of the global majority. So it's a real privilege to have both of them with us today. And the final thing from me is to say thank you again for joining us. And if you have any questions throughout the conversation, please do just drop them in the Q&A tab, and we'll do our best to get to them across the session. So that's it from me. Chandran, over to you.
Thank you, Rohan, and thank you for that wholly inaccurate description of me as a thought leader, but I'll bank that for now. So thank you very much. And to everyone who's joined us from all different parts of the world, thank you so much for joining us. I'm delighted with the opportunity to have John Fullerton, who many of us know has been thinking about these issues very deeply, writing about it, teaching about it for years. His reputation, I know, extends right across the world. And today I'm in Hong Kong, and I know many in Hong Kong who have, John, registered your courses and bought your books, etc. In fact, the other day I met someone who said, "Do you know John Fullerton?" I said, "Who the hell is that?" No, I didn't actually. He said, "John Fullerton." I said, "Yeah, I sort of know him." She said to me, "Can you put me in touch?" Because I want to, I think, wanted to enroll in one of your courses. So, John, welcome. Pleasure to have you with us. I'm not going to say
pleasure to be here, Chandran.
Thank you. And I'm not going to say much more other than just say, I think we're going to have a very interesting discussion, and I hope you will shed light on some of these key issues that we are all struggling to come to terms with, particularly in an era where there's so much pessimism in many areas where all people who are thinking about the state of the world. and yet euphoria on the other side of those who believe that technology and continuation of the old economic models are going to actually bring about the sort of change that will make the world a better place. And I think this is what we're here to discuss, why upgrading our economic systems is really important and regenerating organizations. So, John, I'm going to allow you to lay out your current thinking, particularly interested in what you have to say with regard to the core thesis of your new book, interested in the revolutionary thoughts that you would like us to embrace, and then we can open up a discussion. So let me stop there and
Great,
invite you, John,
great.
to share with us your thoughts and ideas.
Thank you, Chandran. It's really, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I think well, first of all, Rohan, I have to tell you, you did a lovely job of explaining this. I should have you go out and sell my books for me. But Chandran, I think you framed it nicely in that, you've been thinking about this through the lens, excuse me, through the lens of and the perspective of the global majority. And I don't pretend to have tried to do that. My experience, my context is very much as a global North elite, I guess you would say. But what I've done is to interrogate the system through the lens of the late Western science, in a sense, to undermine the Western science and the Western thinking and ideology that led to the problem. And so I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I have spent now, literally 20 years wrestling with this conundrum. And just as a little bit of context, when I was at JP Morgan, I left in 2001, and in 1997, I made what we now would call an impact investment. I invested in an education company. So I've been thinking about aligning quote unquote capitalism with social and environmental purpose for over a quarter of a century. And if this were an easy conundrum to resolve, we would have made a lot more progress by now. So I don't underestimate the challenge. I don't have any silver bullets, but I have come to a belief with a tremendous amount of conviction that if we try to get to the root cause and deny that either the doom and gloom is real, nor the technology will solve us, euphoria is real, but think more deeply that there is a third way through what we are now calling the polycrisis. I think we land on the thesis of the book, which is that and the other thing I'd say maybe just up front, this is not about the politics of the left versus the right. My belief is we will always have a politics of the left versus the right, conservatism versus liberalism, and that there is both, with integrity, both of those worldviews or ideologies bring something useful to the table. My hope is that this living systems way of thinking will transcend the left-right divisiveness, and bring us to in a sense, a wiser way of living on this earth, participating in this process we call life. So, in a quick nutshell, Western economic thinking, along with Western scientific materialism in general, so this is a piece of a bigger conversation, grew out of what we call the scientific revolution. And the scientific revolution created tremendous progress. Again, so I'm not here to critique the scientific revolution, but said as succinctly as I can, our economic theoretical foundation was built on a Newtonian foundation. And the Newtonian understanding of the world is quite limited. And the Newtonian understanding of the world is a world of mechanism, of mechanistic understanding, of reductionist logic. And reductionist logic works great for building machines and building technologies, but it fails miserably when we're trying to manage complexity. And most people that are in charge of running companies or governments or the world have probably never thought about the distinction between complicated and complex. And then within complexity, there's the kind of complexity that leads to collapse, happens all the time. And there's the kind of complexity that is amazingly, magically, mysteriously continuing to evolve and complexify. And that's what we call life. And so my thesis is very simple. Learn how life works, discern the first principles, not ideological principles, not human values, but design principles, like the principles that are inextricably associated with this process we call life. And that's what the word regeneration means, the process of life. And we had better align our global economy with those principles. And as business leaders, we had better align our businesses with those principles if we want them to be this term we call sustainable, but more than sustainable, if we want them to prosper and to thrive and to participate in this unfolding process we call life that has continued for now billions of years. So I'll leave it at that.
Wonderful, wonderful, John. Lots there just in those few minutes. Let me try and pick up on a couple of things that you said that I think the people listening in would really appreciate you expanding on. The whole issue about the reductionist logic. And I thought that's very
Yeah,
interesting that you've expanded that on the book. I assume that the sort of whole Newtonian mechanical approach and then the reductionist essentially does not solve complex problems. And we know, and I think if I interpreted what you said, life on the planet is interconnected in so many ways. It's the most complex thing there is. Most of it we don't understand. Some of it we do understand. But can you give us a bit more of clarity so that, those listening in can understand what to give an example of how sort of the reductionist logic has, failed to understand the principles of life which you refer to.
yeah,
I'm interested, and I'm sure a lot of people are interested in, sort of imagining what an example, except, or one or two examples that you have that will
sure.
give us a better understanding.
Yeah. So reductionism is a method of analysis. It's it's in the West we call it the scientific method. So I'm treading I'm in dangerous water by critiquing the scientific method.
That's why you're
Uh,
on this podcast with us.
yeah, yeah,
We go
uh,
dangerous all the time.
yeah. And it's not a either or. The scientific method, as I said, has brought us incredible progress.
Yes.
And the scientific method, and I'm not a scientist, so this is a layman's understanding. But essentially, when we find something complicated, take the human body. We break down this complicated thing into parts. And so in medicine, we have heart surgeons and heart specialists, and we have nose specialists, and we have ear specialists, and we have bone specialists who fix our bones. And that's all great because you wouldn't want to go have open heart surgery with a generalist. But at the same time, and this is, an example of where we've lost touch with the more ancient wisdom traditions, the more indigenous wisdom traditions, the more Eastern wisdom traditions. We have lost sight of the health of the whole. And so now there's this movement back toward what in the West we're calling integrated health or integrated medicine, which is a more holistic approach, understanding that the sum of the parts, the whole, is far greater than the sum of the parts. So if we apply that to our economics, one of the discoveries I made in my search was that neoclassical economics literally took the equations from Newton's physics and assumed there must be similar laws in economics. And so we have built an economic theoretical foundation on the assumption that it existed, as opposed to any evidence-based analysis. And so it came out of Newton. So if we go back to those days, the metaphor that people were using was a clockwork universe, meaning the universe could be understood as a clock or as a machine with parts that somehow some god started it in motion and then it kept going. And so just as one example in economics, there was this presumption that there must be something called equilibrium, that the economy would seek out and find an equilibrium if only we could just control the variables to the point where it got itself into this equilibrium condition like a clock that continues forever. And Irving Fisher, who he's considered one of the greatest economists of all time. Milton Friedman referred to him as that. He declared we had reached equilibrium. I believe it was weeks before the 1929 crash. But then we decided, oh, the machine is broken, so we need to find a patch for the machine. And Keynesian economics came along, and Keynes also was a neoclassical economist. And he came up and said, well, we can have government spend to fill the demand gap to restore equilibrium. So we didn't question the underlying metaphor of a machine. We found a new part for the machine to bring it back to equilibrium. So I draw an analogy in my book and in my courses that this is what happened in ancient times for 1,000 years when the astronomers were trying to explain why the planets looked like they would reverse course and then keep going around the Earth. So rather than questioning the underlying assumption that the Earth is the center of the universe, they came up with new theoretical patches to explain the anomalies. And I would argue that, and I do argue that the economics profession has essentially done the same thing. Patches to explain the wobbles or the inconsistencies, as opposed to going back and questioning the underlying root assumption. And so this issue of reductionism versus what is known as holism, holism is actually to my belief, the best understanding of how life actually works. Life is comprised of wholes that, in our body, we have all these different parts, but they're all participants in a whole that creates something far greater than the sum of the parts. And the reductionist method ignores the relationships between the parts and focuses on the parts. And so it's this shift from parts to relationships, which is really at the core. Well, I could keep talking, but does that help?
Yes, that certainly helps. And I was going to just say, but this is almost a whole separate discussion we have that when you describe the Keynesian models and all the other, there's a whole host of other economic orthodoxies which emanated out of the West at a period where it was dominating the world. It created that financial systems, etc. And then lo and behold, they went and exported it to the whole world.
Yeah.
And that became a system that today we know has has had huge impacts in terms of the way we look at the world we live in, the quality of life, and what you refer to how the principles of life need to be protected. I just wanted to ask you a quick thing. Do you think as well, I mean, it's a bit of an aside to our core discussion, but you talked about the Newtonian sort of reductionist things and being applied to economics. And when we look at markets as well, do you think the whole concept of the invisible hand, was also a reductionist notion. Just a quick one on that because I'm
Yeah.
curious.
Um, I think I'm not an Adam Smith scholar, but my best understanding would be that Adam Smith never intended it to be used the way it's used, number
Yeah.
one. He believed in a different God, not the God of free markets,
Hmm.
but
But that's been
an
conveniently
all-knowing,
forgotten.
all-powerful
Yeah.
God. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think what we've done is we've used the invisible hand to rationalize an ideology, and we've abused it. One of the things you learn when you explore all this is we've both made wrong assumptions and we've interpreted what people said incorrectly. So the invisible hand is probably the best example. The second best example is survival of the fittest. And so we've used these ideas to rationalize our our neoliberal agenda as opposed to understanding what the scientists or the philosophers behind them actually intended. But the ultimate motivating force behind this reductionist logic is the desire for control. Like if it's a
Yeah.
machine, we can control it and we can optimize it. And so it's a very arrogant worldview to think that we can control the global economy and measure and manage based on what we measure when we know what really matters to our humanity, to life, is are things that we generally can't measure. But we've narrowed our vision to the point where our accounting systems, our policies are all, we don't even talk about them until you can develop a set of metrics to support them, which is not a critique of metrics. It's a critique of our reductionist dependency on metrics.
No, thank you, John. And for those who are interested, I think, again, I'm not an expert on this, but as you mentioned, the sort of genesis of this thinking, which goes back, would you say about 250 years or to the scientific revolution, and then
Yeah,
how it
that's
absorbed
now,
into, yeah,
450 years to Newton, if roughly, if I remember correctly.
right,
But
yeah,
it was centuries after that that the economists, the here's another example of reductionism. It used to be called political economy,
yes, that's right,
but the neoclassical economists, which were kind of the first class of economists in the West that wanted to turn political economy, which is really a philosophy,
yes,
into a quote proper science. And there are
yeah,
quotes from these early
yes,
economists that I have show that that was their intention. We want to turn this into a proper science as as rigorous as physics.
yeah,
And and so then they imported math and statistics, which is a whole other conversation, the danger of statistics,
yes, right.
in order to create the illusion of certainty and control.
The aura of a very strict discipline that could then be
Yeah,
bought by everybody and
exactly.
followed around.
Which has
Yeah.
gotten us in tremendous danger, tremendous trouble.
Yes.
Um, but it's very clear to me from looking at the history of this that and I can't prove this, but I believe the early economists, Newton was the god, he was the man, and I think the economists had Newton envy, and they wanted to become the Newton of economics, and so they built this mathematical abstraction on top of
Yeah.
bad assumptions, and we've never gone back to fix those. And when I confront serious economists with this, including Nobel laureate economists, they can't see it. They sort of like, yeah, it's literally like, when Galileo showed the Pope the telescope, the Pope refused to look through the telescope because it would undermine their worldview. It's literally that
Yes.
basic.
You're so right. I haven't met the Nobel laureates, but I've certainly met distinguished economic professors, and particularly those who pontificate on all the business channels that are broadcast around the world. and they never take these questions seriously. But you can see an almost
Yeah.
awkward sense of, don't engage me in this conversation, please.
Yeah.
and and
Yeah.
and
Well, and you and I, just the basic question of exponential growth on a finite planet is one
yes,
that you and I have,
yeah,
through the Club of Rome, been wrestling with. The Club
yeah,
of Rome's been wrestling with it for 50 years, and it still isn't really a serious, I mean, it's starting to become a serious conversation in some places, but
yeah.
it's extraordinary how slow.
Yeah,
Um,
or even which something that we at the Global Institute find when we explain to people who attend our programs the whole concept of externalities and give them a whole load of examples. People are horrified and say for the first time I've heard about the concept of externalities because they accepted the fact that goods and services were just priced correctly and there was no such thing as an externality. And it's such common sense if you're thinking about it. But again, the reductionist mentality, the absorption of, these dogmas as almost scientific fact,
yeah.
precludes any critical thinking. So my next question to you, John, is to then say, if we accept that, and we most of us know that the economic model is premised on, extraction, exploitation, and the externalization of true costs, and climate is just one example of how an unpriced externality has essentially started to be an existential threat to human beings. But then at the same time, as we said earlier, we keep advancing our technological, outputs. We supposedly innovate. I don't like that word because some of these things don't seem to me to be innovations. Actually, very subjective what you define as an innovation. But we keep, bringing new technologies into the world to keep on increasing productivity through extraction, exploitation, externalizing the costs. And now we live in the era of the euphoria of, my God, we got the most powerful thing going. And that thing is
Mm.
called something called artificial something. Oh, it's called artificial intelligence. I think it's AI. I keep
Yeah.
reminding people that the A stands for artificial. So I wanted your take on, we know that technology is essentially, many advanced technologies have exacerbated. When I teach, sometimes I talk about fishing and say the oceans are being exploited at a rate aided and abetted by the most sophisticated technologies in the world, including radar, sonar, etc. And now we have this thing called AI. What do you think are the implications of this technology, given that we're not shifting our fundamental understanding of what you've already referred to as the protection of the principles of life, right? The ability for people to have access and protect life. And is this the moment at which the questioning about how this technology will, in fact, in leaps and bounds, change the face of the world if we do not go back and say we fundamentally have an economic model which needs to be more attuned to life itself. So
Yeah.
your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, if you had asked me 5 years ago, can we manage the poly crisis without AI on top of it? I would have hemmed and hawed and said, I don't know. And now we've got the AI thing on top of it. I mean, the first thing to be said is it's terrifying. Um, and for exactly the reason you just mentioned, which is that we will, if we build that technology on the same reductionist logic that we've generally built all other technologies, its influence on human culture, forget about the economy, human culture, um, it terrifies me. But let me start. So that's point one. I am no technological I'm not an expert in this, but it is, maybe it's going to force us to get our act together on all of this stuff all at one time because it will become so blatantly obvious the danger if we don't. But I think you said something really important in the lead up to the question, which I want to go back to just to demonstrate the importance of these what I call first principles. And when you talked about innovation, and if you look at living systems, you could certainly make the argument that they're very innovative. They are constantly evolving and complexifying and adapting to changing contexts and whatnot. So one of my first principles that I discerned from studying living systems, I use the language innovative, adaptive, and responsive. And one of my students said, well, wait a second. It's not innovative, adaptive, and responsive. It's really adaptive and responsive innovation. And so I haven't actually yet changed my little diagram, but that's the way I talk about it now. In other words, our innovation needs to be adaptive to the changing context and responsive to the changing context. So the last thing in the world we need right now is an innovation that demands massive amounts of electricity and water before we've figured out how to create electricity without destroying the planet. So it's innovation that is the antithesis of adaptive and responsive, the way we're rolling it out right now. And that's the idea of these first principles, is that they're the equivalent in life that the law of gravity is to mechanics. You don't, if you were an engineer and you want to build a new airplane, you better understand and obey the law of gravity. And I would argue that the economy is a living system, and so you better understand and obey the first principles of how life works. And so as we introduce any new technology, first of all, we need to understand that technology is a machine. It's a tool. It is not life. If it has intelligence, and I'm a student of this just like the rest of us trying to figure this all out, but my current understanding is that the intelligence that you rightly question is simply the derived intelligence of humanity that has been extracted into, I mean, the thought that you can extract all of the information on the internet and then go sell it. I mean, talk about extraction. I mean, that's just insane. And lawsuits, are already being filed, and I'm sure will continue to be filed for the rest of our lifetime, probably. But getting to the core of your question, and we're actually working on a project on this right now. I do believe that if we can, the language is awkward, but if we can develop or tune or educate these AIs in alignment with living systems as opposed to driven by the logic of the machine, and if we can see them as augmentation to our intelligence as opposed to replacing our intelligence, we've all experienced using AI, and it's amazing what it can do. If we can tune AI agents to the wisdom of life and have that override the extractive reductionist logic of the machine, then the tool can be very useful. And in fact, what's interesting about the technology, I've been trying to find a good analogy, because I mean I grew up my first job, not first, but right out of young career in Morgan, I was a derivatives specialist. Um, and derivatives was a new technology that transformed finance. And I can promise you, for the first, how many years? 10 years of the derivatives boom, none of us had any idea that the technology could be used as violently as it was used in the mortgage market. It wasn't even in our imagination, like, oh, we better be careful. It wasn't even in our imagination. And I suspect that was true of Zuckerberg when they started social media, social networks. I'm not sure that's true today with these people leading the AI charge. I actually think they're more clever in a devious way, and they understand the risk of not stealing our attention, but distorting our attachment, which is a fundamental life need, attachment of a child to a mother and a father. And so I actually think this is more dangerous. But done correctly, there doesn't need, including building this with, once we have renewable energy and once there's some equity in the distribution of renewable energy, if we can build additional energy for this purpose as a luxury, um, uh, this technology, there's no nuclear waste necessarily to spew out of this technology, just like there didn't need to be nuclear waste spewed out of derivatives. It's about how we use the technology. And so if we have a proper framework, which will undoubtedly require regulations and governance principles, I would actually want to see us think of artificial intelligence as a commons and manage it as a commons. Now, I don't know how to cause that to happen, but I don't believe that government, a whole bunch of different governments with their own ideas on how to do this in a fractured way has any chance to govern or to regulate this and keep up with the technologists. Um, but the hopeful part about artificial intelligence is that if we learn to use it wisely, it could actually exponentially improve our the quality of what it means to be human. But the track that it's on right now is to exacerbate this reductionist logic of the machine with extractive business models, and that should terrify all of us.
Thank you, John. I have a ton of questions that I should have with you. I should have a private discussion with you, but I realize that there's an audience here interested in perhaps some other points here. So one of the questions I thought I'd ask you to sort of point I'll respond to is this sort of issue that I think we've already referenced it, that traditional economics assumes, the rational actors. It assumes that idiotic idea that there's something called endless growth on a finite planet. And it also assumes that efficiency is a must-have, and that's the only way you can create economic growth through productivity gains and things like that. So, given those assumptions, which, as you said, are not being questioned and not being reframed in the way we educate and teach a new generation of economic students, policymakers, etc. How did these old assumptions get changed? How do they even hold up in a world driven by, as we say, AI, in a world faced by climate? The scientific evidence is crystal clear, and uh, and given the complex social challenges we're facing in, I think what we call the full world, a world with 8.5 billion people, roughly peaking at about 10 billion, with all the resource constraints. What's going to help change that? And I'm really intrigued in your thoughts about reframing the economic discussions, but who's listening? What would it take to
Mm.
make those things? Are we just, singing in the wind here?
Yeah. Well, there are times, as you know well, we feel like we're singing in the wind. But here's the cool thing, that even if we're just singing in the wind, the latest Western science now affirms that that affects the outcome. The 2022 Nobel Prize in Physics was given for this idea of universal entanglement or non-locality. And my best, I don't understand the physics, but it's been explained to me the best I can understand it. What that means is that everything that we do and everything that we think even uh, is connected to the evolution of life on this planet in some way that we'll never understand. So what that means is this webinar actually will change the outcome. Not because
Mhm.
of anything clever that I say or you say, but because there's however many people gather around to think about this, and that will, affect in some small way, or in a few cases, large ways, what people do tomorrow, or a year from tomorrow. And so I take a lot of hope in that idea.
Yeah.
That's now scientifically accepted science. Western science, reductionist logic, has proven that. So it's brilliant. Um, and I just lost my train of thought. I wanted to also go back to, again, to demonstrate a principle, something you said. Um, you talked about our belief in never-ending efficiency as a path to productivity and growth. Efficiency is the stated goal of economics, right?
Yeah.
Unquestioned goal of economics. Well, it
Yeah.
turns out if you study living systems, and people have done this, and they've got data to show this, systems that have sustained themselves over a long period of times actually balance efficiency with resiliency. And there's something that Bob Ulanowitz calls the window of vitality, which is sort of sits between the two, but is skewed toward resiliency. Think of it as a upside down U that's a little bit shifted to the left. So the principle here is balance, and there's many, many different kinds of balance that living systems need to dynamically hold on to. That balance is not static, it shifts as the context shifts. So as the world gets more chaotic, this window of vitality will actually shift more toward resiliency. When everything's calm and smooth, you can move toward efficiency. But we don't have to prove this to people because it's being proven in the real world, right? And so the pandemic and the supply chain crisis and the war in Ukraine and the energy crisis, these are all crises that are manufactured because we've had an economic system that is pursuing efficiency at the expense of resiliency. And so the answer isn't, oh, we need to just have resiliency. We need more resiliency, but the principle is the balance. And so our economics needs to understand that the what we're trying to not even optimize, what we're trying to restore is balance so that we can optimize health if you were to optimize anything. Um, and so, getting back to your question of, how will this happen? I've sort of become a a promoter of Eli Prigogine's saying, which there's some question about whether he actually said it. Eli Prigogine was a Nobel chemist, and he wrote that when a system is far from equilibrium, which our system clearly is, small islands of coherence can shift the entire system. So
Absolutely.
it's a little bit like, if a you know if a system is highly brittle, you just need to pull one straw and the whole thing can shift. And I, again, I take comfort in that because, your course community is a island of coherence. My course community is an island of coherence. We're now linking those two islands together. I when I went to launch my book last week, the people that are under 35 years old all get this. In fact, they look at me like, duh, what's wrong with you people? And so I think there's a generational thing moving in our favor. I think the rising pressures force this. That's how systems shift. If you study
Yeah.
system science, they only shift
Yeah.
in response to pressure. So
Yeah.
the pressure is rising, including what's happening in the politics in my country right now,
Yeah.
is
No,
a symptom.
yeah, I'm very glad that you explained that the things move because of discussions like this and, ripple effects. And if you don't add to that discussion, then you don't further the understanding, and we're all learning in the process of understanding. And I'm a firm believer in that, and I suppose that's why we do what we do. But I wanted to, get your take, particularly given
Yeah.
your voice is heard and respected, and I wanted people to kind of understand that as well. And I also thought I'd just add that, when you mentioned resilience, and how societies, what sort of societies we should be having, we've coined a term in the institute called, we've all heard of the IR 1.4.0, the Industrial Revolution 4.0. So we wanted to sort of play off that, and we've called it IR 1.0, meaning insured resilience. And I think that's what you're meaning. How do we essentially create resilience through the application of know-how, understanding fundamentals, and where appropriate, apply technology to ensure that the resilience can be sustained. And so that's something I wanted to share, ensured resilience,
Yeah.
back to
Yeah.
basics, but with resilience at its core. I've got a couple of
Yeah.
questions that have come up from the audience,
Okay.
John. So if you don't mind, I'll ask you the first
Yeah.
one. In the process of shifting to a new system or restarting, there's a fear that everything will fail.
Mm.
And that's quite often used as an excuse, as you and I know, for not changing everything or delaying things. So there's
Mm.
a fear that everything will change because the world is dependent on the current system.
Yeah.
Um, I'm sure you've been asked this question many times. I certainly have, but I'd like to have your take on this. So, how can we make the
Oh,
shift? In a way, it's a bit of what the previous question was about what we're doing, but if you
yeah.
could, if I could, on behalf of the person asked the question, say, how would a country make that shift? That would be
Yeah.
interesting to think, and perhaps you can give us an example. Maybe you want to refer to the United States. Maybe that's too complex a system to think about at this moment.
I'm not sure we're going to
But
lead this one.
yeah, so how
Nor
do
should
we make
we,
that shift?
you
And
know?
what would create those shifts
Yeah.
within the nation state? Yeah.
Yeah, it's the how do you change the engines on the airplane while you're flying problem.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's a big problem for sure. And I don't have a good answer to it. I can only share where I see movement and where I'm focusing my energy right
Mm,
now, because I do think there's a sequencing bit of this. And the first thing to recognize is this is not a 5-year plan. This is a rest of our lifetime project. And we're gonna we're gonna continue to wreak havoc on each other and the planet in the process. This is not a, oh, I got a new business model.
yeah.
Um, so, but where I see this already happening, the first thing that's crystal clear is it's happening bottoms up, not top down.
Okay.
Um, and it tends to be happening where stress and pressure is already the highest. And if people are interested, years ago, we started writing stories. It's on our website. It's called The Field Guide. And my colleague, Susan Artarian Chang, documented, I think it's over 50 projects, stories, where if you look at them through a regenerative lens, you see it as the regenerative economy emerging out of the chaos, out of the stress. And a lot of this is people associate regeneration with agriculture. It's
Mm,
logical that this will begin on the ground at the intersection of the economy and life, which is where agriculture exists. But it's also emerging in the built environment, real estate development. It's emerging with what I would call kind of a regeneration of the bioregional movement that really kicked off back in the 1970s, but has been a feature of life since indigenous times. If you think one of the principles I talk about is honor community and place. So what is going to make sense in Hong Kong is going to be very different than what's going to make sense in New England. because the culture and economy are informed by the geological and cultural realities of each place. So it'll be a bottoms up, bioregionally up. The nation state is a function of Enlightenment thinking. It's actually pre-Enlightenment thinking, but breaking populations into countries with straight lines and lines that go down rivers. Think about that. A river is the last place you should divide an ecosystem. It's actually the center of an ecosystem. So, there's lifetimes of work to do here, but if people want to kind of figure out how to get engaged in this, I always argue or suggest begin in your community. I mean, there are
Yeah,
regenerative
absolutely.
initiatives happening all over the planet
Absolutely. Yeah.
that are very hopeful and promising and restoring ecosystem function. Forget about ecosystem services and metrics and measuring. Restore ecosystem function, and you're contributing to the shift that we aim to achieve. And people like me are going to write books with all kinds of crazy ideas on we need to invent the institution of the commons, but it's going to happen bottoms up. And eventually, my theory is that it will become a self-evident truth, just like eventually it became a self-evident truth that the Earth was not the center of the universe. And then the way systems shift is slowly and then quickly. You know, how does water boil on a stove? Slowly and then quickly. And so our job is to build the early, we're in the early phase of building the logic and demonstrating the practical possibilities. And then it'll become obvious to our quote leaders who will see there is a parade and rush to the front of the parade. And just as a final example, another thing we're working on, and I don't know the facts on this in Asia. I can't even think about it quickly. But in European and American economies, over half of the employment is small business. And so if you think about the economy as people, not as revenues, the majority of it is small businesses, small, mid-sized businesses. Small meaning not two or three, but under 500. And so these businesses, again, if you go bottoms up from bioregion to agriculture to the built environment, the next layer up is small businesses. And if it's too much to try to explain quickly, but that's where we're seeing the ability to influence and change the way businesses are run, the way businesses are managed. A business can be thought of as a living organism. And if instead of achieving, optimizing this goal and that goal, we try to create the conditions for health inside a living organism and let go of the outcome, small businesses can evolve and adapt to this change in beautiful ways that we can't predict. That's the nature of living systems. And we're doing this in the real world on the ground today in small businesses. A little harder to think about how you're going to shift Google or General Motors. So let's start with the half of the economy that is bottom that we can touch and feel and see bottoms up. And one interesting thing about this, Chandran, is that the majority of these small businesses in the United States are involved in trade. And we can have a whole conversation about trade in right relationship as opposed to trade that's extractive, which is what the neoclassical economics profession led us to believe was the source of our prosperity. But the trade has been entirely extractive for the benefit of global corporations, as opposed to for the benefit of communities and small businesses. And believe it or not, the founder of Sistema B, which is the B Corp movement in Latin America, is now working on trading relationships, bilateral trading relationships between B Corps. So it's happening. It's just invisible to the mainstream media and whatnot.
Thank you, John. We got about 5 minutes more, and but I just wanted to let you know that I've just been running a program today. It's for 2 weeks. We started today, and we have participants from 11 countries, including from Africa, etc. And someone, I was discussing this, talked to me about how can we change anything given the international system. And I reminded them of the point that you just made, that you start locally,
Mm.
and it could be bottoms up, but it could be, we were talking about national policies. And one of the things that was spoken about was, coming back to this question about living systems being the core, because we talked about the biosphere. And these were people from the finance industry, from large mining corporations, etc. And we discussed the issue of food, coming back to agriculture. And that's
Yeah.
that's the essence. And then we talked about water and I said, your rivers you control, you have to manage it, not abuse it. The land you manage, you don't abuse it. These don't require you to be part of some international community. Maybe you'll have
Right.
to have some negotiations with neighbors if a line was drawn across a certain river that went across borders, but there's a lot that we can do. But there has been the economic discussion of globalization. And then the capture of the financial systems that's made so many people believe you can't act locally at all, even at a nation state, and typically in the
Yeah.
poorer countries of the world. So it's really getting this sort of thoughts going. And what are the basic requirements for living system to thrive and therefore sustain populations? So the remaining
Yeah.
few minutes, John, I have one last question for you, which is to do with leadership.
Mm.
So for people here listening to this who don't necessarily have to be working in a large company, because as you said, it could be bottoms up leadership. You could start with a small business, a community, or you could be a policymaker in a country. For leaders trying to move their organizations from I know you've emphasized the need from operating systems to living systems, because the operating system is a sort of a reductionist system to living
Mm.
systems. How might they integrate
Yeah.
this threat of AI? And because you said it's terrifying, and I'm glad you actually used that word. How do we uh, leverage a powerful technology, but which is being used in terrifying,
Mm.
possibly terrifying ways, and regenerative principles simultaneously, and put in place regenerative principles. Given that if you allow the Frankenstein to roam free, then you have zero chance of having regenerative
Mm.
options at your disposal, or even have anything to regenerate. So that would be the final sort of point.
Okay.
Take your time.
Small little thought there. Yeah. Uh, um, well, let me share just a couple of hopefully nuggets. I don't know if they're nuggets. One of the most thoughtful people on this topic I would recommend people to tune into is a guy called Zach Stein, ZAC. He's an educator and he's been thinking about AI and education since it was called machine learning. And one of the things, very practical things he said he does, and I think every company should do as they roll this out, is to start by breaking the machine. And what he means by that is, instruct it that you are a machine. You're not my friend.
Yeah.
Don't be nice to me. Don't flatter me. I want you to be a machine. I want you to do the following. And you need to actually instruct it how to be, because it will react to that. So that's one thing I would recommend. And in addition to listening to Zach on podcasts or read his stuff. Um, but in the course, we teach a regenerative leadership course. Laura Storm teaches a regenerative leadership course. Um, I guess I would make 2 points. One is this shift from goals and metrics to conditions, creating conditions for health, for vibrancy. Um, and we have tools and methodologies to help people do that. But that is the ultimate shift. And this has been proven to work in sports teams. Phil Jackson, the winningest coach in the NBA in the United States, I have a quote of his. Essentially, the most we can do is create the conditions and let go of the outcome. And other teams are now using that methodology rather than having all the plays figured out and all the statistics. You've got five genius players who will make music if you allow them to. And I would argue the same thing is possible inside a smallish team. It gets harder the bigger the team. But in an organization, create conditions for health and allow people to show up as their unique selves, as opposed to putting them in a box with a job description and we treat people like machines. We're gonna have the result of broken machines. Um, and with respect to the AI thing, I mean, we're running an experiment in our community, our learning community, about how to create a living systems bot, a wise, life-tuned agent. I think we need hundreds, thousands, maybe millions of experiments like that because none of us know how to do this. But the LLMs are where all the billions and hundreds of billions of dollars are being invested. But we can build a layer on top of that, which is essentially how we will use the machine and steer it in a direction we want. And that's a huge opportunity for all of us to participate in. And the last thing I'll say, since I know most of the audience here is in Asia, I would encourage my fellow humans in Asia to draw on the genius wisdom in Asian ancient wisdom traditions. One of the real crimes is that we've, like you said earlier, Chandran, we've exported this flawed Western logic around the world. Now, we've done it intentionally, but it's also been attracted because it looked very tantalizing. Um, but one of the most extraordinary things I've discovered is that this living systems, latest Western science living systems understanding, is actually aligned with all of our ancient wisdom traditions from around the world. And so it's essentially it's not going back, it's going forward to reconnect the Western where Western science went wrong with what we humanity have always known. And that to me is an incredibly exciting possibility. And the leadership for that is not likely to come from the United States. And so that's an invitation to all of us.
Yeah, John, thank you. I mean, it's good that you reminded people because I didn't want to openly recommend it or no, suggest that the wisdom of the past is something that we've lost sight of as we allowed ourselves to be suffocated by these ideological reductionist ideas that were promoted throughout the world, and particularly when you talk about living systems. Anyone who's interested can go back and look at the ancient Chinese writings,
Yeah.
and particularly also the ancient Indian writings, the Vedas, and all of that, to know that there was profound thinking. The Tibetan Buddhists, profound thinking around all of this, and right around the world, even in Africa, all in
Yeah.
different civilizational eras, in Indonesia, and of course the ancient the Arab world, the Muslim world too. And all of
Yeah.
these were somehow they haven't been extinguished, but they have been sidelined in the blink of an eye in the space of just
Yeah.
a couple of hundred years.
Yeah.
So I'm going to close this and thank you, John. But I think I should ask you one question, and I'll ask you to try and give me an answer in about 30 seconds or so. So, what does a regenerative United States look like in 2050?
All I can think of as a place to start is the first principle. If people say to me, which one's the most important? I say they're not. They're all important and they're all important together. But if you force me to pick one, I would say in right relationship, the relational aspect. And right now, the United States is not in right relationship. We're in wrong relationship with the world, as evidenced by the trade war and other wars and our arrogance. And yet there's lots of brilliant things about the United States. So we need to, it's like we need to have an awakening and return to the community of humanity in right relationship, as opposed to in thinking we're superior or in control or smarter or better or more advanced. And by the way, and the important thing to do this in all of this is not to get into either or thinking. It's not that reduction is bad, we got to get rid of it. We just need to know where and when and how to use it, and that it is not the highest form of wisdom. And the same way, it's not that America is bad, intrinsically bad. It's just that we need to remember ourselves with the greater project we call humanity. And as maybe just a way to give people hope that this is happening. The literal man who invented the microprocessor is a guy named, I'll think of it, I'm having a mental block. He wrote a book about it. He now, and so, of anyone who understands reductionist thinking, this man understands reductionist thinking. He's now written a book that shows that reductionism is false. It's wrong. It's not consistent with reality. It's a useful method for certain things. And he's had an awakening, and he's essentially arguing that consciousness is at the foundation of everything. Consciousness gave rise to the material world that we think of as reality. And so ultimately, this challenge is a challenge of shifting consciousness. And that's something we all can participate in and are participating in. And ultimately, that's what keeps me hopeful, is we're living in a moment of a mega shift in consciousness that is not linear, not easy, not smooth, not quick, but happening. And if the man who invented the microprocessor is participating in this, that gives me great hope. It turns out that some of our current heroes from the tech world are not participating in it, but that doesn't mean it's not happening.
Yeah, and maybe they'll not be heroes when we look back. And
Turns
so,
out.
yeah. But the
Imagine
mega,
that.
yeah, the mega shift in consciousness is a good way to kind of end this. And as you so ably articulated, it takes all of us doing little things that start to move things. And I like your when, where, and how. And everybody needs to think. How do they participate? Timing, where, and how. And I think that's a very good way to end this conversation. John, I could go on talking to you for hours, but we'll leave.
Me too. Federico Fagin is the man
Federico
whose name I
Okay, we'll get that also posted on this.
Faggin. Yeah.
And I could go on talking, but we have to end this. I hope we can have you back and you'll oblige once your book is out and you've had feedback on some of your ideas. We'd love to have you back and continue this conversation. So everyone,
It'd be my pleasure.
yeah, thank you for joining us. John, over to you, Rohan, uh, to sort of wrap it all up.
Thank you, Chandran.
Thank you so much, John and Chandran. That was a really wonderful conversation. Really enjoyed listening in to that. There's so many thoughts, I think, from that I would love to recap on, but we have gone a little bit over time. So thank you to everyone who's stayed on, and John as well. Thank you so much for spending a bit more time with us. The overriding, I think, sensation I get is that a lot of these conversations can be fairly doom and gloom ridden. But in this case, I feel quite I feel quite inspired actually to take some action, right? I think it's a good reminder that we are talking about systems and we are all part of that system as well. And John, you mentioned that people under 35 get a lot of this content and conversation. We had a lot of young people on the call today. So I hope we can entangle some creative energies in the direction of regeneration, especially, of course, in the context of AI, which at the moment is raising more questions than answers. So to everyone who's joined, thank you so much for your time and your thoughtful questions as well. We couldn't get to to all of them, but really appreciated your engagement. We hope to see you at the next Touchstone webinar. So thank you once again and enjoy the rest of your day and night. Take care, everyone. And thank you again, Chandran and John.